Hey everyone, I'm Mike Settele, founder of Settele Tutoring, and in this lesson, I'm going to go through the top 10 SAT tips specifically for procrastinators. These are last-minute things that can help you add a couple points to your score for people who are probably watching this video the night before their SAT. So if that is not you, if you have more time, then don't watch this video. It's not very good if you've got plenty of time to study. I have way better stuff at my channel homepage and in the description. But if this is the last thing that you do before your SAT, hopefully I can give you a couple of tips on things that you wouldn't be able to figure out for yourself about how this SAT works. And my hope actually is that you'll be a little annoyed with yourself as you're watching this video that you didn't find my channel sooner, and maybe a little annoyed with yourself during the SAT that you didn't start studying sooner, because this is a different kind of test. So before we get into the top 10, let's talk about some accountability. Do me a favor, in the comments, tell me, why did you procrastinate? And more importantly, what are you going to do so that you don't procrastinate for the next time? Most people take the SAT more than once, so you're probably going to want to take it again. And my recommendation is that you start studying about 2 to 3 months before that SAT test date. The reason for that is that not all things can be learned the night before as a procrastinator. So the things I'm going to help you with here should add, hopefully, maybe if you're lucky, 100 points to your score. But for the bigger picture score improvements that we want to see, you're going to need more time, because those kinds of changes are about changing habits, things that you've learned many times over the years that need to be changed and adjusted for the specifics of the SAT. That takes time, that takes several weeks, so make sure for your next SAT, you're holding yourself accountable and getting started about 2 to 3 months beforehand. But maybe we've only got a couple hours before your test, so let's get started and see what we can learn in this very limited amount of time. Number 10 on my list here, memorize the punctuation marks, specifically the big three. Semicolons are basically the exact same thing as periods. We use them to separate two complete sentences, two independent clauses. The colon is kind of like a more flexible version of a semicolon. The first part must be a complete sentence that we could end with a period. The part after the colon can be flexible. Sometimes we can just include an extra clause, a dependent clause, or sometimes it can also be a complete independent sentence. So we've got some flexibility there. Now, dashes, there's basically two ways to use them. If we have a single dash, one dash in a sentence, it's basically behaving like a colon. If we have two dashes, then they're basically behaving like parentheses and putting an extra piece of information somewhere in the sentence. So there are exceptions to all these rules, but to be honest here, exceptions are for people who don't procrastinate. So if you have more time, go to my grammar playlist and start learning about the exceptions. But if you don't have time, then this is going to be good enough to get you the right answer on most questions. Let's move on to number 9. Solve systems of equations in Desmos. Now, Desmos is the built-in graphing calculator that you get for every single math question. If you see a question like this, where they're giving you these two equations and they're trying to find the solutions or intersections, normally in math class in school, you would have to go through this algebraically, do some substitution, do some elimination, find the answers for X and Y by doing algebra. Not on the SAT. We're going to go right to the built-in calculator, just type those things in, as you can see I did here, and look, we're going to get the actual intersection points that we can tap very, very easily, and then just make sure you give the SAT what it wants. In this case, it's saying that we need the value of B, which is in the place of the Y coordinate, so maybe that's the 10 or the, what is that, -5, so it could be either of those, and then specifically though, they say that B and A are both positive constants, so yes, we just need the normal B equals 10 here, and we're done. This is a 30-second question if we know how to use the calculator, so make sure that for systems of equations, you're pretty much always going to the Desmos calculator. Moving on, number 8, also a math tip. Use the reference chart. Every math question allows you to access a geometry reference chart. There's a button in there. It looks like an x squared for some reason, but it gives you access to geometry formulas. So basic things like area and circumference of a circle, rectangles, triangles, it's all there, as well as all the volume formulas for the basic 3D shapes. Now, of course, they're not labeled, so you need to know the names of those shapes. So we've got the prism, cylinder, sphere, cone, and pyramid. So try to learn those words if you don't have them down. But also I want to draw your attention to the top right there, the special right triangles. Those are really, really handy. We use those when we only have one side of a right triangle and we need to find the others. They're kind of like proportions we can use. But the biggest thing with that is people forget that they exist. And the best way to remember is that there are certain numbers that kind of remind us to maybe look at this chart. So if we see 30, 60, or 45-degree angles somewhere in a geometry question, if we see numbers that have a radical 3 or a radical 2, then it's probably the case that we're gonna need these formulas. So open up that reference chart and see if you can make that fit. But regardless, you should never be getting a geometry question wrong because you forgot a formula. Most of them are here. There are some exceptions that are not given here, but again, exceptions are for people who don't procrastinate. So if you need those, go to my channel and you can learn them, but this is just the bare minimum that we need in order to get the geometry questions right. Moving on, number 7, play the outline game. So what does this mean? Well, at the end of each reading module, there are these very easy outline questions. They're going to start by looking like this. They're going to have basically a student has taken some notes. They're going to give you the notes in terms of bullet points. And then the question is going to be what it says there. Basically, it ends with which choice most effectively accomplishes this goal. All right, so here's how we're going to play the game with these questions. Because we know the rules of the game, these are very easy questions to get right. First rule, don't look at the bullet points. Just go straight to the question and the answer choices. The question is going to have a very clear goal. In this case, the student wants to emphasize a similarity between the two musical works. Okay, so now when we go to the choices, if it doesn't give us a similarity, cross it off. Choice A. While Hopeful Dawn features a bright and optimistic opening melody, Shattered Dreams includes only harsh, angular melodies. Well, I don't know what any of that means. I don't know what those things are, but it sounds like a difference between the two works, not a similarity. So I'm just going to cross it out. Now, the bullet points will tell me more information about those things, but I don't need that information in most cases. Let's just move on to B. Petrova wrote Shattered Dreams in 1992 to reflect on the challenges that many people face throughout their lives. There's only one work there. How can we have a similarity? It's only about one thing. Get rid of it. C. Petrova's Hopeful Dawn and Shattered Dreams both use dissonance to symbolize challenging moments. That sounds like a similarity. That's probably the answer, but let's move on to D. Hopeful Dawn shifts from an optimistic opening melody to a more dissonant concluding harmony. Again, this is only about one of the things, so it's wrong. It's definitely C. That would be enough for me to pick it and move on. Most of these outline questions will follow these rules and will be this easy, so we really don't want to get these wrong. If you are left with multiple answers after you do this process, my recommendation, go back to the question right there and read it again. Many times there's a secondary goal hidden in the question, and that's how you know which one is right and which one is wrong. If that still doesn't quite do it, there might be a rare case where we actually do need to use those bullet points that I got rid of, because basically what can happen is they will give you two answers to the question, but the answers themselves will be different. The facts will be different. In those cases, we go back to the bullet points, we check for the right facts, and that should solve the question. But I want to stress that that is very rare. So don't waste time reading those bullet points in most cases. Only do it when you absolutely need to. This is a great place to save time and some points. Like I said, these are really easy questions if we know how to play the game. Number 6, back to math. Okay, so this is a topic that is basically going to come up on every SAT. We need to memorize the rules for the questions involving the number of solutions. This is a little bit memorization heavy, but these are also questions that are very, very repetitive and predictable. That's what we like on an SAT. We don't really get a lot of options like that. So the first thing you should see when they start talking about the number of solutions in a question is, do the equations that they give you involve an x squared? If there is no x squared, then these are lines. And whether it's one equation or two, you want to make it into two equations, two y equals mx plus b equations, because then we can think about the slopes really, really easily. If there is one solution, it's because they're going to have different slopes, different m's. There are 0 solutions when there is the same slope and different y-intercepts. And there are infinitely many solutions when it's the same slope and the same y-intercept. And that's because they're the same exact line, so they intersect in every place. Regardless of how those equations are presented, if there's no x squared, make them look like y equals mx plus b, and you'll basically solve the thing just like that. Now, if we do have an x squared, we have to think differently, because now we have a quadratic, a parabola that curves, so things behave differently. In a lot of these cases, we can go to Desmos. We can use the calculator to understand whether that parabola goes through the x-axis a couple times or no times at all, or if it's intersecting a certain line that we're being asked about. Sometimes, though, we need to use a more formulaic approach using the discriminant. This is something that everyone should have learned in school by the time they're taking Algebra 2. So hopefully I am just refreshing your memory on this topic. If this is something that you need to actually learn from the ground up, well, you should have done that weeks ago. This is not something that's going to be easy to memorize in the last night. But hopefully I am just reminding you of something you already know. There are two solutions when the discriminant is greater than 0. There is one solution when the discriminant is equal to 0, and there are 0 solutions when the discriminant is less than 0. And then you might recognize that the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac, is part of the quadratic formula. So it's easy to remember if you've already memorized the quadratic formula. Like I said, these are questions that involve a lot of memorization that I'm hopefully just reminding you about, but you will almost certainly get 2 or even 3 of these questions on every SAT. So these are some guaranteed points that I'm hoping to give you just by reminding you that these things exist. Let's move on to number 5, and this is a really, really, really great one. This is probably a case where I'm going to change your life. So we already talked about Desmos. We talked about how it can help us solve systems of equations, but it can also solve just regular old equations for us. So in this case, I've got this messy thing. I could distribute the 5x and the x and start combining like terms, or I can go right to Desmos and just type it in. You can see just like it's written. I didn't do anything different. And what do we get? Desmos is an algebra solver. It gives us not a parabola. This is not a curve here. These are 2 vertical lines that go up and down forever. And where they hit the x-axis, which is where they go up and down forever, we can see very clearly the solutions for this equation, right? So we have solutions at -2 and 3.5. And since they ask for the sum of those things, we would just add them up, and 1.5 would be the answer. That is it. No algebra needs to be done if we know that Desmos does this. Now, just in case at some point the SAT, the College Board, makes a big change to Desmos and prevents us from doing it this way, we can still use Desmos. All we would have to do is separate the 2 equations into 2 different lines, and then there we are finding the points of intersection. You can see the same thing. In this case, we care about the x coordinates because that's the variable that we're missing, and so we get -2 and 3.5, and now we have parabolas, not straight lines, but parabolas. We're finding the intersection between them, and we still get the same exact answer. But right now, you can do it the first way. You can just put it in as is, and it'll give you those vertical lines. You can do that for any kind of equation with just one variable, and it'll give you the vertical lines where the answers are. So very useful. Number 4 gets us back to reading. This is about the transition questions. And basically our strategy here is we want to dumb summarize the transition words. We're going to get weird transitions that we don't use very often in our lives. Nevertheless, therefore, likewise, moreover, things that we maybe can define pretty easily if we're really pushed on it, but that we don't have a good sense of because we just don't use them very often in our own writing or in our own conversations. So what we're going to do here is try to categorize them into these 4 main categories. Most transition words on these questions can fit into words that mean but, words that mean so, words that mean and words that mean for example. The ones I've listed right here are the most common words, so these are the ones that you should definitely memorize and be able to categorize, but of course, there are plenty of others. I have a full lesson on these, definitely worth your time if you've got more than just a couple hours to study for the SAT. But for now, the reason we do this with these complicated words, even if we know what however means, even if we know what nevertheless means, the reason we do this dumb summarizing is because we have a much better sense of what the word but means, of what the word so means, right? We use words like but and so and for example multiple times every single day without even thinking about it. It's an instinct. We don't have to think about it. That's how confident we are with those words. But these other more transition-y words that we're going to see on the SAT are not as strongly ingrained in our brain. So rather than think about those complicated words, we don't have a strong instinct. We're going to dumb them down to the more simple words and see how those work. It's a really useful strategy for simplifying those transition questions. And that's important because of tip number 3. When we are going through the reading modules, make sure that you start with the grammar questions in the reading section. Okay, so it's not in this order, but we're going to force ourselves to go in this order. We're going to skip ahead in reading to question 15. Usually that's where the first grammar question is. It might be 14, it might be 16 or 17, just find it. But the grammar questions are the ones that say standard English conventions. You're going to start with those, do all those questions. Then the transitions are going to come after, do all those. Then it's going to finish up with the outlines. There's 27 questions in the section. You're going to work from basically 15 to the end in 27. That's the last outline. These questions are generally easier. They will take you less time. Our goal should be less than 10 minutes. However, since you're procrastinating, you might not be as strong on the grammar rules and transition words as you should be, but if you kind of have a few of them memorized and play the outline game, you should be able to get most of these questions right very quickly and confidently. That allows us to save more time for the harder stuff. So once we finish those outlines, go back to the beginning of the section and do the vocab and passages. That's 1 to about 14, wherever we started before. When you do that, skip the hard ones. If something looks like it's going to be crazy, it's okay. Skip it and move around. You don't need to go in order here. Just do the questions that you feel like you're going to have the best chance of getting right. Ultimately, don't leave anything blank. Make sure you put an answer for every single question because there's no penalty for wrong answers. A blank is just as painful as a wrong, so you might as well take a guess and hope for the best. So make sure that you are moving around there though, because you want to be able to maximize your score. So don't rush through trying to get to everything. It's okay to sacrifice some hard questions for the sake of getting more time for the stuff that you have a better chance of getting right. That's also true in math. So we got a little bit of a bonus tip down there at the bottom. The math sections are organized a little bit more nicely. They're going to be ordered from easy to hard. Easy questions at the beginning, hard questions at the end. So it may seem counterintuitive, but spend more time on the easy and medium difficulty questions because they're actually worth more points. So when you get to about question 15, that's where the hard ones are going to really start. When you get there, feel free to skip around. Do the ones that seem the easiest for you, but don't worry about trying to do all the questions. Just maximize correct answers, spend your time on the stuff you have the best chance of getting right, and then guess randomly on everything else. And one thing that we can do that's going to really help us with the math questions that are hard, we're going to use this main strategy for math. Plug points into equations. This is really important. I have a very good lesson on this that's in my strategy series in the description. Definitely spend more time on this if you struggle with math, because it's a way of turning complicated math questions into much easier questions because it removes how we think about things. And this is true whether you're good at math or bad at math, right? No matter what, we want easier ways to get started on hard questions. So this looks hard. The equation looks hard. We have this weird stuff about, F is defined above, T is a constant. What does this all mean? None of it matters. If we recognize that we have an equation and they give us a point to plug into that equation, it doesn't look like a point, but it's function notation. This has got an x and a y. And so without thinking, all I'm going to really do is plug the point into the equation, and it's going to look something like this. The 0 goes in for the f of x, for the y, and the t minus 2 goes in for all the x's. So you can see it gets a little messy. And at the end there, I have to be careful because, there's a distribution maybe with that negative, so I have to think about parentheses. But once I put this in, the ball kind of gets rolling pretty easily here. Now it's just a matter of cleaning things up. So you can see the t minus 2 to the third stayed the same. Where did the t minus 6 come from? Well, negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6 in the middle. And then in the end, remember that negative gets distributed, so it's actually 7 plus 2, and 7 plus 2 is 9, so 9 minus t. Now, why would we do that? Well, hopefully you've learned enough math in school that you recognize that when we have these little factored things and it's equal to 0, the reason we do that is to think what would make each of these equal to 0 separately, so we don't have to do a bunch of algebra together. So basically, 2 minus 2 is equal to 0. 6 minus 6 is equal to 0. 9 minus 9 is equal to 0. These are the solutions. These are the values of t that would make this thing equal to 0, and they told us to sum them all up. If we do that, we get 17, and that is the answer. So this question that looks really scary, actually not so bad if we just mindlessly remember that the main math strategy is to plug points into equations. So that's our number 2. I do that on as many math questions as I can, and it doesn't matter whether you've been studying for 5 minutes or for 5 months. No matter what, this is our main math strategy. And that brings us to strategy number 1. And this is where we have to really use the SAT's style and format to our advantage. So the number 1 strategy is make sure you remember to work backwards from the answer choices. That may seem obvious, but lots of people forget to do that because that's not how you take tests in school. The tests in school are much more forward working, right? You kind of get a question and you have to find some solution to that and solve it in a very forward way. But we have, in most cases on the SAT, 4 answer choices. So it is our job to work backwards in many cases to test out those answer choices as a faster, more efficient way of going through these questions. So some examples of that. In the reading passages, test the summaries that are given in the answer choices. If they ask you for the main idea, you don't need to come up with your own complicated, detailed main idea summary. The 4 answer choices are summaries. Use those. Read the passage first, but read the choices more carefully and see if you can test those out. How do they match with the stuff you read in the passage? It's better to use these summaries that they're giving you rather than spend a lot of time writing your own. In writing, with the grammar questions, Before you start reading the sentences, look at the answer choices, think about what rules might matter. If you see a semicolon, you know you have to think about sentence structure. So when you read the sentences, now you're thinking about sentence structure. Where do sentences begin and end? So by looking at the choices first, we get a better sense of what rules are going to matter as we solve the question. And of course, in math, we have a very familiar strategy we all learned when we were younger: guess and check. If you have answer choices, plug them back in. And the reason we want to do that is we want to avoid algebra as much as possible. Algebra is time consuming, it is prone to mistakes. If we work with numbers instead, that is so much better. So if a question is asking you, what is the value of x? And then they give you 4 values of x, don't bother solving for x. Just take the x values that they give you and put them back in the equation and see what works. That is usually going to mean a much more efficient approach to solving the question. So don't forget, the answer choices are just as much a part of the question as the question itself. Work backwards whenever you can. It is usually very, very efficient. But I will admit, this kind of strategy is not something that's easy to implement in just 24 hours. So if you are procrastinating and studying last minute, this may be hard to remember during your test. So my advice is, remember, you can take the SAT more than once. Hopefully these strategies gave you a little bit of a boost and kind of added some points to your score. If so, when you get those scores back, come back to this video and let me know. How did you do? How did this help? Was this useful? If you are taking the test again though, this is why you should subscribe, because I'm constantly making new videos, and that way you won't lose me and you'll be able to come back and get more resources for the next time and prepare a little bit more thoroughly, a little bit more responsibly, and get even better scores. So if you do have a little bit more time before your SAT, my recommendation, you can see it in the bottom left there, is that you look at my SAT strategy series playlist. It's in the description. It's also really close to the top. It's really close to the top of my channel homepage. So go to my channel homepage. You'll see everything's organized based on topic and strategy. So it's really easy to navigate. But that is really good to get a little bit deeper sense of things like plug points and new equations, those dumb summaries, the grammar rules, all that stuff. So also great tips for Desmos. So really useful there. So if you do have a couple more hours to study before your test, definitely do that. If you come back here though and you're looking for more practice, a great way to show support for the channel is to become a channel member. The channel members have access to original questions that I have written. Each video gives you a brand new question so that you don't spoil the practice tests or the College Board question bank, and it's immediately followed by my amazing explanation of that question so you can learn right away. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments. If you're taking your SAT tomorrow, at a certain point, make sure you go to bed tonight and get plenty of sleep. Make sure you've printed out your admission ticket or you have it on your phone. You have your photo ID, you have your Blue Book app fully charged and updated, and you've done the check-in, all that stuff, because yes, you don't want to be rushing around and procrastinating in the morning as well, but basically do whatever you can to get a good night's sleep and lower the amount of stress. Try the stuff we talked about in this video, and best of luck on the exam. Once again, I'm Mike Settele, founder of Settele Tutoring. Remember, when it comes to your scores, don't settle for less, guys. Don't procrastinate. Settele for more. Thanks so much for watching, and again, good luck on your SAT.